Hello, this is Patrick W. Crawford, Moo-Ack Productions, and this is the behind the scenes for the animation of GameChap's More Fright. So first off, it's Blender, Premiere, After Effects, Photoshop, and Illustrator at one point. I'm always asked what programs to use, even if I put in the description, so those are what I use. The other question I always get is, how long did I have to do it? I started on the 21st of February, and I handed over my part on the 11th of April. So throughout this video, at the top left, you're going to have a hand-drawn animatic, which is the first planning stages. In the middle is going to be a midway render or previs, and under that, it's going to be the final result. When we started off, we were first looking at improving the rigs, adding hands, testing out the mustache, things like that. One of the big things I developed is this here Fancy Feet rig, as you see now. The newer rig actually rolls or rocks on the floor. After that, I was doing things like getting textures from the games, like the portal and lava texture aren't actual files, so I had to record the game screen to actually get them and use in the animation. Moving into one of the first scenes, you can actually see the broken sword from mine. Now, this is my generic walk cycle, especially the new rig. Here I have a little demonstration of how I approach walking animation, which I always redo on the scene to give myself the most control. I never copy-paste the animation. So the way I do it that I find easiest is I go in two passes. The first pass, as you see here, I'm just placing the feet and the level body motion. And then I go and do the arms in a second pass. I copy paste that throughout. And then at the final stage, what I do is I go through and I give elevation to the middle points of these cycles between each individual step. And that's what kind of gives the up and down motion that's very rhythmic and looks much more natural when you actually are walking, because you don't stay perfectly level like you see in a lot of beginners animations. So that's what the final thing looks like. Pretty easy, and it's reproducible. So here is the planning set for the first scene. I always draw it out in Blender usually at the beginning. Here you see an older example of what the house looked like before we changed it to wood. And now I have a view of the overall scene. I never actually use imported Minecraft worlds. I always make it in the scene myself. I find that's a bit easier, so I haven't tested that out in the workflow. But I do make heavy use of these instance objects. So like, for example, I can just spawn in a tree. It's not actually duplicating the mesh data, but bringing it from another library linked file, which makes it go a lot faster. And here you see I have different layers for like a simplified version of the entire scene. I have another layer for the characters, and more layers that I'm adding now for other details in this scene. Like for example, see on the bed there is one of the physics layers I used for controlling the cloth simulation actually. So here we have a scene, the nightmare scene. It's showing the node compositing editor in Blender, which is how I did the effects for this scene. Each node does a different thing to the footage. So I kind of do it in a couple different passes. Right now highlighted is one of the lower passes. Up here is a blur pass, which I use for sort of bloom effect in this thing. This is with it and then without it to give it an extra punch, I guess. Then I go ahead and add in a vignette, or I apply a vignette blur. I actually use that as the mapping for a sort of outer blur. So I have this very blurred section here, and using that vignette matte, you see the edges of the screen are now blurred. And then I add in an extra step of color correcting for that extra touch. So one way I accomplished many of the effects was I actually did double renders. For example, in these couple scenes you see I did one pass with the hair-binding character, one without, and then through compositing it later I added it over. In some special case, like in the mirror scene, I had to add an extra pass of the sword to overlay it. So for the portal effect, I actually went into Blender and used a procedural texture, which I animated different parameters, and then I used that as a matte for the portal and fading out of the actual character. For the nether scene, everything that's not the immediate foreground was actually like recorded from Minecraft to save time on actually building sets. That little shockwave you saw there was just a displacement map in Photoshop. And here we see one of the alternative endings before we decide to go with the walking sequence at the end. So that was the whirlwind behind the scenes. If you want to hear more about my workflow and the way that I create 3D animations, I've done more extensive videos on this in the past, so check out one of those videos that left. Otherwise, I hope to continue creating Minecraft shorts as well as other types of videos, so watch out for that in the future. As always, thank you for watching.
Moo-Ack.